powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. Now, live from inside the Matt Black Kia Studios. This is Football at 4.
Football at 4 is powered by the Inside the Birds podcast. But first, let me congratulate Dennis in Brigantine and Bob in Beasley's Point. They're our latest qualifiers for the Pick Your Trip. That sounder goes off. You hear South Jersey Sports Centers in the morning, and during the Sports Bash, you have a chance to enter. Dennis and Brigantine, Bob and Beasley Point are our latest qualifiers. We'll be live at Maynard's in Margate next week on Thursday for our Eagles draft party. And, of course, all our qualifiers will be there, and one lucky winner will win an Eagles road trip to Washington or New York. You pick the trip. We'll send you thanks to Philly Sports Trips. Go to phillysportstrips.com for your next Philly Sports Trip. Geoff Mosher is in the house for another edition of Football at 4. And, Jeff, we've got 1 week and 1 day away to the NFL draft. Pick 10 and pick 30 will be on high alert here, as we'll be talking about, but we got a lot to discuss. What's going on, bud?
You got it, man. The countdown is on. 1 day, actually, until I think both of us lose our blue check marks on Twitter unless we pay for it as well.
So. No blue check mark for me, man. I'm not cool.
Oh, no?
Enough.
Well, you managed to survive and make a name for yourself without it, huh?
No blue check mark. I've never been quite cool enough to get the blue check mark. But is that tomorrow?
I believe Twitter just put out a statement that, yes, all blue check marks will be removed unless you're
anarchy now in the silly season that we already have. Will that only be escalated because of no blue check marks?
Couldn't they have waited till after the draft? Because we can't have this much chaos before the draft, right?
Oh, man, I didn't even think about that. I want to get Paris Johnson was in for a visit yesterday, okay?
Yeah.
Does that coincide with, hey, we just signed our quarterback to a massive deal, we now have to protect him? Probably not. But is Paris Johnson a guy at number 10 that you think is heavily in play for them?
Well, to answer your first question, it is a coincidence. It does not coincide with the contract because a lot of these dates for I hate calling them top 30 visits, by the way. They shouldn't be called that. The NFL doesn't call them that. A lot of the 30 visits you're permitted are scheduled way before they actually happen, right? There's a whole lot of team players have to visit. So it does not coincide with the timing of the contract extension. And he is a guy that, that's a good question. Is he heavily in play? I'd have to really know a little bit more on how the Eagles see him. There are some teams I've spoken with that don't think he's as highly rated, or they like him, but wouldn't quite use a top 10 pick on him. There are some that I don't think he has the versatility to play two different positions. Obviously, with any prospect, there's going to be teams that see it differently than others. But
he did play
because he's an offensive lineman, though. He is someone that should be on Eagles' radar.
He did play right guard at Ohio State, and then they moved him to left tackle. So he does have the experience of playing. Maybe he's not viewed as two different positions, but he actually did play the position that the Eagles have an opening at, whereas Peter Skronsky, the other guy, he has played primarily tackle, but because of his short arms, right, Jeff, people project him more to be a guard. That happened with a guy named Danny Watkins before, by the way. He played tackle in college, but he had shorter arms. They moved him to guard. That didn't go so well. So was Paris Johnson actually the better fit for Philly if they like an offensive lineman over Peter Skronsky?
That only depends on their evaluation. He can play two positions, but then if they don't think he's a Pro Bowler at either spot, right? But they think Peter Skronsky, who can only play guard, can make 10 Pro Bowls as a right guard. I would suspect they would still evaluate the better prospect higher and give more credence to it, regardless of positional versatility there. We always talk about best player available, right? You don't want to pass on somebody who's a 4, 5, 6 multiple time Pro Bowl player just to get a different player who's not as good but is more versatile or anything other that satisfies some other criteria. More of a need at that moment.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, you talk about more of a need, Jeff. Will we say that right guard is a need for this team?
Yeah, I think it's fair without really knowing 100% if Cam Jurgens can play that spot. They obviously drafted Cam Jurgens to replace Jason Kelsey at center, not knowing when that day is going to be when Jason Kelsey says, I'm done. And it may not be, through the lifetime of Cam Jurgens' contract the way he's playing, but it may be tomorrow. It wakes up and says, you know what, I made a mistake. I'm too old for this. I don't want to go through it again. So they've always been smart like that. They've always planned ahead in the trenches to have guys ready. But to answer your question, they don't know 100% sure that he can play right guard. When you look at Peter Skronsky on tape and evaluate the tape, it looks like he's going to be a damn good right guard in the league for a long time. Even if he's just a guard and not a tackle, you've seen some pretty good guys have long careers playing guard, across the NFL that would be worthy of a top 10, top 12 pick, whether you're talking about, Quentin Nelson, who's leveled off a little bit. I guess he had a couple of great years. Zach Martin for the Cowboys. I mean, there are guards in this league, who've done it for a long, long time at a really high level. And so that's what the tape shows and what teams say about Peter Skronsky is that he is that kind of guy.
Yeah. So, Jeff, you mentioned Cam Jurgens. They drafted him last year to be the center. Many people think they'll just plug him in at guard. But if he can't play guard, would the Eagles be comfortable with Jack Driscoll being their starting right guard?
Well, he'll be in the mix for the competition, and they've got some time between today and the end of the draft and the start of the regular season to add depth in whatever way they feel possible, whether that's trade market, whether it's veteran cutdown day, whether it's street free agent signing like LeGarrette Blount in May or June, right? There are players out there. But it is, I will say, unless you're trading for somebody who is young and on the rise, it's going to be difficult to find someone that you can just put that right guard and say, oh, that's way better than what I have in Cam Jurgens or Jack Driscoll, because Jack Driscoll, when he has played, has not been perfect. I wouldn't even say he's been above average, but he's been good. I mean, this team won games with Nate Herbig, so they can certainly win games with Jack Driscoll at right guard. They won a Super Bowl with Steph Wisniewski as a guard, and Steph was a journeyman player who was meant to be a backup.
Yeah, and look, every team can't have a Pro Bowler or borderline Pro Bowler at all 5 positions. I think if you said, hey, Driscoll was our starting right guard and he was the weak link in the line, he probably is better because he's playing next to Kelsey and Johnson, for a full season. So if you walked out of this draft, didn't get one of those linemen, and then Jurgens wasn't ready to play right guard, I guess that Driscoll, he would be the weak link of the line, but probably would be better because he's playing next to Kelsey and Lane Johnson.
Yeah, I mean, of course. And also because he started a fair number of games for a guy who's been in the league for a few years here. It's not like anything would be new to him. And again, you've won games with Jack Driscoll filling in there before. He's I wouldn't say he can't be a liability because he obviously is not a perfect player and he does have some struggles, but you also know he can give you a certain level of dependability unless he just sort of regresses. But we haven't really seen someone like that. No one that I can think of, in the last few years where a guy who, showed some promise and then got worse and worse and just needed to get out of there.
Geoff Mosher, InsideTheBirds.com, the Inside the Birds podcast. Over at InsideTheBirds.com, you guys evaluated whether or not Jalen Hurts' contract was worth it. You were on Monday when the deal came out, but now you guys got a chance to kind of get your hands dirty a little bit on that contract. What did you guys find about the deal? Was it a more team or player-friendly deal?
Well, here's what's interesting about the deal, Mike, is that it's, a couple days after the announcement of it, and yet I don't believe the actual terms of the contract have been made available yet for, there are ways to get the contract. It has to be submitted first to either the NFL or NFLPA, I believe both. And I have not yet seen an official submission, which makes me think that maybe there are some small things that are still being ironed out. But the bottom line is, until you see the real numbers, it's really hard to go deeper into the conversation and talk about team-friendly, player-friendly, market value, what's fully what I want to know is how much was fully guaranteed at the time of signing, right? There was a report that it was, I believe, $180 million guaranteed or fully guaranteed? Is that also fully guaranteed for injury, right? There's a whole lot of terminology and small things that may not seem very big, but they are very big. And I got to be able to see these first. My initial feeling, though, is that it's, listen, $51 million annually. That's, right now it's the number one annual average value for a quarterback in the NFL. So I think Jalen Hurts did pretty well there. And the fact that how he was able to get this deal done and not see a significant, by the way, I have to say I was wrong, I guess. I felt that they were going to take some of that new money and put it into this year's cap and bring his cap number up considerably for him, but still low for a quarterback. But it sounds like his cap number is only going to raise just a little bit, and a lot of that money is going to be pushed back, and I'm sure there's going to be $1 billion and one voidable years that help spread out that money too. So I was wrong about how they were going to approach it. But again, Howie did a deal that gives him cap flexibility seemingly this year, and I think even next year with the cap number.
Yeah, almost 3 or almost 4 years. I mean, it's really not to that fifth year, Moch, where he's got that $80 million cap hit. And then I guess the question becomes, at that point, do they reapproach him and restructure that deal and take that $80 million cap hit and sprinkle it out over the length of his next deal?
It's funny. I joked with Adam today, Adam Kaplan. We were just exchanging texts, and I said, maybe the reason the official terms of Jalen Hurts' contract aren't in yet is because Howie's already restructured it twice. So
3 times. I'm telling you, if you look at that deal, it looks like they have preemptively restructured that thing 3 times already.
It does. And see, I'm a little dubious about saying like these cap hits are low for the first 2 or 3 years, because the Eagles do a lot of option bonuses that don't appear as guaranteed money to start off with, but then all you got to do is be on the roster, right? Third day of the league year, then they kick in, or whatever it is that they kick in, and that can change the cap number. So it's really, again, I'm not trying to be evasive or not let people know. I mean, it's a good conversation, but I've been guilty too much in the past of calling something a great contract or a bad contract, or trying to explain why it's beneficial, advantageous, and then the next day realizing everything I said was not right. So I don't want to make that mistake here with you.
Yeah, well, listen, from what we look at with this deal, because, the guaranteed money that he gets and the way that the cap hits them, it really, this year, he's still playing under the old deal, right? I mean, so you're really not this year is not affected by this deal at all.
Well, I thought his number, if it's correct, I thought his number went up about $2 million, which if that's what you mean, like really not affected
correct,
much.
yes,
correct.
Yeah, you're not getting hammered by that deal. So that my point is, I guess, and we talked about this a little bit earlier, they could still be in play to add some more pieces. This deal doesn't basically say, all right, we're done this offseason.
Yeah, and then, there could be some potential risks involved. And again, if assuming that that's the case, where maybe 3 years from now, the cap number gets really big. Sure, he's a young quarterback, so he should still be in his prime by 3 years from now. But 3 years later, on a quarterback who's been running as much as he has and has already had the ankle injury 2 years ago that made him miss a game, the shoulder injury obviously last year, who takes those kind of hits, might be dangerous, right? I mean, you may have a guy who's got a lot of wear and tear 3 years from now because of the physical style he plays, all the quarterback sneaks and everything like that. He keeps himself in great shape, and I'm not sitting here trying to sound an alarm. I'm just sort of discussing the idea of a guy who, plays the game the way he does, takes a lot of hits. By 27, you got to hope that he's still in great shape and not dinged up too much.
You guys had Greg Cosell on the latest podcast, The Intel with Greg Cosell, and took a look at a position that, is not talked about a lot in this draft for the Eagles, but wide receiver. It's not a great wide receiver class in terms of first-round talent. The last couple of years, you've had so many great first-round names in the draft, it seems like. This one, it seems like there's maybe 1, possibly 2, but is this a good draft that you can maybe get that number 3 slot receiver?
Yeah, it's a deep draft with, I think Greg even mentioned this, there are a lot of like kind of that shiftier, smaller guys, as you get into the later rounds that will probably make for good slot wide receivers. Probably not something the Eagles are looking at really early, unless it's just like, oh my God, you're in the 3rd round and Zay Flowers is still on the board, right? Unless it's one of those things where it's an obvious move, but certainly in the latter rounds is where the Eagles have tried to hit on wide receivers in the past and get something out of it. It didn't work out real well with Hightower, but it did work out, you could say, with Quez Watkins, certainly, who was a sixth-round pick, if I'm not mistaken. They signed the kid from Florida a couple of years ago as a priority free agent, Grimes. Everybody was in love with the guy. It didn't work out. He got injured, never came back. But the Eagles do like to draft wide receivers later in later rounds and hope that they can get something at it. Kind of the old dart throwing thing, we call it, where if you hit on one of 5 or 6 guys, well, hey, you've already got 2 really good receivers and a good tight end. So if you wind up hitting on one guy, that's all you really need anyway.
Yeah. Well, listen, we all know that they don't have a lot of middle round picks, so it might be tougher to do that this year. But I guess we assume they will find ways to add middle round picks. What's more likely, that they pick the 2 guys in the first round or end up having a pick in the 3rd and 4th round?
That's a good. I hate the. You're good, Mike. You got a gift. We talked about this. That discussion really centers around how they view the 30th overall pick, right? I mean, again, it's sort of like an extra second-round pick more than an extra first, because it's so low that at that point you're already past your guys who you have first-round grades on, which is usually about 13 to 15.
Mm-hmm.
So, and this is not a real high blue chip draft, so it wouldn't surprise me if the Eagles had fewer than 13 to 15 first-round grades on guys. So, does Howie take 30 if he has an offer for it and move out to try to get middle round? I could very much see that happening. So I would say that is more likely than him going without any middle round picks.
All right. Well, 1 week in a day, it will all play out, and you can listen to the draft right here on 97.3 ESPN. Thursday night coverage begins at 7 o'clock a week from tomorrow. Geoff Mosher and the guys at InsideTheBirds.com have the latest version of the Intel with Greg Cosell. You can check that out on all the Inside the Birds podcasting platforms. Geoff Mosher, we will talk to you next week, man.
Mike, real quick, if I can mention one thing. I forgot to mention this when we were talking about Hurts' contract. We have an analytics guy who does a lot of work for Inside the Birds named Sam Finkel, and on our website, InsideTheBirds.com, he has a really good analytics breakdown of the contract terms as we know it versus other quarterbacks and how that contract that Hurts got kind of falls into an analytical market value based on what other quarterbacks have signed for. So I encourage everybody to go check it out because he explains how the model is put together, what variables it's based on, and all the comparisons. So if you go to InsideTheBirds.com, check it out. It's a really good look. Good story by Sam Finkel.
Check that out. By the way, today on my Facebook page, one of my memories was Mosher Monday at the Ego Bar at the Taj Mahal with Mike Gill and Geoff Mosher.
Wow, missed those days, man. We're getting old, though.
2010, we were doing the show together at the Ego Bar.
Great days.
Those were some fun times. All right, Moshe.
Have a good one, friend.
I'll talk to you. All right, Geoff Mosher. At that time, Moshe was covering the Eagles for the Wilmington News-Journal. For you Delaware listeners over there, he was the Eagles beat writer for the Wilmington News-Journal, and we did the show together every Monday at the Trump Taj Mahal in Atlantic City, which, of course, doesn't exist anymore. It is now the Hard Rock, and they had a bar in there called the Ego Bar. And on Monday nights, we would do the show there live, and then we'd hang out and watch Monday Night Football together. And the place would be crowded with people watching the game. We'd give away a table every single week, and, it was a great time. We were young, having fun. 2010,